All right, welcome to Chapter 6. In Chapter 6, you should have your PowerPoint presentation, and also hopefully you have read through Chapter 6 as well. Most of you at this point in time should have taken your first test. I think I gave you an update on what it was going to be, but I will try to get your grades out as soon as possible. Kind of depends on my other workload and things that are going on. I travel a little bit, but I will try to get you the grades out to you as soon as possible. And if there's any questions during that you had during the test, please reach out to me too. I want to make sure that you are in line with all the concepts and programs as we move forward. So anyways, Chapter 6, we will talk about supply and demand and the effect that government policies have on supply and demand. We'll talk about how government can put policies in place to have a ceiling on prices, and they also can have a floor on prices as well. We'll also talk about how a tax on a good affects the price of the good and the quantity sold of that specific good, and how taxes can drive markets up and drive markets down. And we'll talk about how the tax burden is split up between the buyer and the seller. It's not just a one-way street when it comes to taxes. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But first of all, let's talk about the price ceiling. The definition of a price ceiling is a legal maximum on the price at which a good can be sold. So let's talk about a price ceiling example. Let's say rent control. In some large cities, not necessarily in ours, but we have, the federal government implements a price ceiling set in mind to allow everyone to have the opportunity at certain housing. So the price ceiling is below the equilibrium price. Remember we talked about the equilibrium price where supply and demand meet. If the price ceiling is below the equilibrium price, then the price ceiling is what we call binding. This is when the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. Because of the resulting shortage, sellers must in some way ration the goods or services to the buyers. The goal of rent control is to make housing more affordable for the poor. Because of the supply and demand of apartments are fixed, it's generally inelastic in the short run and upward sloping elastic in the long run. The shortage is much larger in the long run than it is in the short run. Rent-controlled apartments are rationed in a number of ways, including long waiting lists, discrimination against minorities and families, people with children, and even under-the-table payments to landlords. In a lot of large cities where there is price control, price ceilings, a lot of people hold on to their apartment and sublease their apartment or sublease their house to others so that they can keep the price ceiling on the price point where they purchased the house, but then lease the house out to someone else and make additional money off of it. As you will see, probably for every government rule or policy that's created, you will always see someone come up with a way to get around it. So the quantity of apartments also suffer due to rent control because people stop building because they know they can only make so much profit off of it. So now let's look at how the price ceilings affect market outcomes. There's two possible outcomes if the price ceiling is put into place. If the price ceiling is higher than the equilibrium price, it is not binding and will have no effect on the price of the quantity sold. If the price ceiling is lower than the equilibrium price, then the ceiling is binding and is consistent and a short-run shortage is created. So if you look at your graph that's in your PowerPoint and in your book, you see that the quantity is on the horizontal and price is on the vertical, and you see supply and demand intercross, and you see the equilibrium price point in the middle. In this case, where the price point is creating a shortage in demand. If a shortage for a product occurs and price cannot adjust to eliminate it, a method for rationing the good must be developed. Not all buyers benefit from price ceilings because some will be unable to purchase the product at the price that's being asked. So price ceilings have some benefits. It works in some areas, but you do have some folks who will take advantage of that or will skirt around the laws or the systems to keep certain groups out. And so price ceilings does have a place. It's just how it's managed and how it's governed, whether or not it'll be beneficial or not. Okay, let's discuss price floors. A price floor, as we know, is a legal minimum on the price of something and can also include other things such as taxes, regulations, and labor as far as income. The definition, the actual book definition of the price floor is a legal minimum on the price at which a good can be sold. The market for labor, when we look at income, the market of labor looks like any other market. Downward sloping demand, the upward sloping supply, and an equilibrium price called a wage, and an equilibrium quantity of labor. If the minimum wage is above the equilibrium wage in labor, a surplus of labor will develop, which we know is called unemployment. The minimum wage will be binding constant in only the markets where equilibrium wages are low. Thus, the minimum wage will have its greatest impact on the market for teenagers and other unskilled workers. A lot of our part-time jobs that you hear people talking about. For example, if we continue on with the minimum wage, if the price floor is above the equilibrium price, then the price floor is binding, and the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded. Because of resulting surplus, buyers' demands for goods or services must be in some type of way rationed out among sellers. So, how does the price floor affect the markets and outcomes? There are two possible outcomes for the price floor which is put into place into a market. If the price floor is lower or equal to the equilibrium price, it is not binding. It has no effect on the price of the quantity sold. If the price floor is higher than the equilibrium price, then the floor is binding and is consistent, and the surplus is created. For example, if you look at your graph that's on your PowerPoint and in the book, it shows the two possible end results. You see quantity on the horizontal line, price on the vertical line. You see the equilibrium in the middle. You see the surplus that is created when there is a price ceiling and if there's a surplus. So, what is the general perception of the price ceilings and price floors for most economists? Most economists feel that markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity, which that goes against price floors and price ceilings. So for the most part, most economists oppose price ceilings and price floors because they feel, as we've talked in the past, that economics is based on activity, economic activity, one side or the other. They also believe that the natural causes and that the supply and demand will eventually take care of itself, and that an equilibrium price will be met without the government's involvement. For the most part, economists want economic activity. This is why they're considered policy advisors. This is why they're considered business partners. They work with people on business plans so that they can make these assumptions and predictions about the activity. If there were no activity, if everything worked perfectly, then economists would not be needed. Okay, as you can see, economists in economics, our theories, our formulas, and our uses of data to predict outcomes and make assumptions is used not only by the government, but also businesses and industries, but there's other variables that play a key role into markets, and we'll talk about those later on in further chapters. I just wanted you to know that they're out there. There are other variables in the market other than the buyer, the seller, and the government. So we will talk about that, the black market, the natural causes, weather, farming, those types of things. We'll talk about those a little later on. But to continue on in Chapter 6, where our focus is government involvement and how taxes and regulations and the actual effect it has on the equilibrium. We're staying on the equilibrium for now. Eventually we'll move off of that and talk about outliers and margins. But as right now we're talking about the government and its effect on equilibrium. When the government places a levy on a tax for a good, the equilibrium quantity of that good falls naturally. That means a tax on a market shrinks that size of the market. There's less there. A tax on a good places a wedge between the price paid by the buyer and a price received by the seller, making both sides short. When the market moves to the new equilibrium, buyers pay more for the good because they're paying the taxes, and the receiver sells less for it because sometimes they have to pay taxes, and also they can't charge as much because they have to factor in taxes. In this sense, buyers and sellers share the tax burden. The incidence of tax does not depend on whether the tax is levied on the buyers or the seller. This is known as the division of the tax burden, meaning that it's being shared. The incidence of the tax burden depends on the price elasticities of supply and demand. Most of the burden falls on the side of the market. That is, it is less elastic because that side of the market cannot respond as easy to the tax by changing the quantity bought or sold. Supply and demand can't fix it when the tax gets involved. So let's talk about some different examples. In 1973, OPEC raised the price of crude oil through the roof, which led to a reduction in the supply of gasoline. Prices went too high. The federal government stepped in and said, hold on, we've got to help out everyone. Not only rich can afford gas, because so many people depend on that for the daily lives and the businesses and manufacturing. So the federal government steps in and puts a price ceiling, so you can only charge so much. Well, that led to motorists being forced to spend time and long amounts of time standing in line at the gas pumps, and gas became getting rationed out. Well, that didn't work well. There was a huge uproar, and the federal government eventually had to remove the price ceiling because they realized that it was a huge mistake. So price ceilings imposed most of the time by the government is an intention of aiding the poor, but it can also harm both rich and poor. It can harm everyone. Shortages alike can harm everyone. So, what is the textbook's definition of a tax incident? It's the manner in which the burden of the tax is shared among the participants in the market.